So thank you everyone for joining us. We are here with our second installation of the Nature Connects Us webinar series and are very delighted that you had a moment to join us today. So our first one was with our state director, Mike Fuhrer, and he talked with us about how TNC is adapting to our current times. If you missed that session, it is available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/natureok, and or you can email any of our staff members and we can send you the link as well. And for today, for our second installation of this series, we are chatting with Katie Gillies. Katie is our Director of Conservation for the state of Oklahoma for Nature Conservancy, and she is going to talk with us today about bats. Bats have been very much in the headlines lately, unfortunately, due to COVID. However, they do play a very important role, and how Katie is going to share with us today about how TNC is working to protect critical bat habitat in Oklahoma. Before I turn it over to Katie, I want to introduce you all to, hi Nancy, by the way, I see your hello. Hi Nancy, hi Stephanie, hi Barry. Thank you all for saying hi, but also wanted to introduce you all to a few buttons down at the bottom of your screen. Those will be your friends today because Katie will be available to answer questions after her 15-minute session. There is a Q&A button at the bottom. There's also a more button that will allow you to do the chat window. So you can send us questions at any time via the chat and or via the question and answer session, question and answer button. However, we will be waiting until the end of her presentation to begin the question and answer session of this. So her presentation, like I said, will be 15 minutes long. Hi, Johnny and Elise. And then also after that, we'll do a Q&A session. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna turn this over to Katie and look forward to hearing what all she has to say. So Katie, take it away.
Well, thank you, Katie Hawk. I was really flattered when you asked me to do this presentation for this webinar series. As you mentioned, bats have been in the news an awful lot the past couple of months with the COVID-19. So we thought this would be a really great time to talk about bats and talk about Oklahoma's bats and their importance, as well as talking about what the Nature Conservancy of Oklahoma is doing to protect them. I've been working with bats for the better part of 20 years and I love them and I love this topic. So if you guys have questions, just shoot them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. You want to go to the next slide, Katie? So Oklahoma's bats. Oklahoma has a range of habitats, everything from the Ozarks to the Ouachitas to the tall grass prairie to our western plateau. Our state has a huge diversity of species, and that includes flowers and birds and bats. Oklahoma actually has 21 different species of bats, and that is an awful lot. Here in the United States, we have 46 different and unique species of bats, and so that means that Oklahoma represents almost half of all of the bat diversity in the country. And across the globe, we have almost 1,300 or 1,400 different species of bats, depending on how you look at them. So we are really lucky here in our state to have so many different and very interesting kinds of bats. And I'm going to show you that broad diversity next, if you'll go to the next slide, Katie. So take a look at all of these sweet little faces. At first glance, they maybe look kind of similar. They're all kind of small. They're all kind of brownish. They all eat bugs, right? But they all have really unique roles that they play in our ecosystem. And when you look more closely, there's a lot of differences here. This guy in the very middle with those big orange ears, he's called a pallid bat. And those guys are found only in western Oklahoma. And they eat a lot of really interesting bugs, but the most interesting one I would say is that they eat scorpions and they are immune to scorpion stings. If you look at some of our other bats, like the guy here in the very lower right with those really big long ears, that's our Ozark big-eared bat. And that's an endangered species and it is only found in the Ozark Plateau. And those guys, they need those big ears because they eat moths only. And those big ears help them listen for the beats of those moth wings. We've got other really cool species like the one in the lower left, that's a hoary bat. That's one of our biggest bat species here in Oklahoma, and they're kind of these big fur balls. They migrate across the landscape from Mexico all the way up to Canada, and when they roost, they hang out in pine trees, and they look just like pine cones, man. You cannot tell them from a pine cone in the distance. We've also got another species that I love just above that hoary bat is called the Brazilian free-tailed bat. And that is our longest range migrating bat. It forms the largest colonies of bats in the state. Thousands and thousands of these guys will pack into a cave in the summer months. And they form the biggest colonies, not just in Oklahoma, but in the country and in the world. That first picture that I showed you on that last slide is at Bracken Cave down in Texas, which is a cave protected by Bat Conservation International. And they estimate that they've got 20 million of this species of Brazilian free-tailed bats roosting in that cave. So they look a little similar. Yeah, this is a picture of them leaving Bracken Bat Cave. So they guess there's 20 million, but it's really hard to count that high when they're moving really fast. So that's an estimate. But so they all look really similar, but there's huge differences among all of our bats here in Oklahoma. As I mentioned, some of them are big migrators. Some of them hibernate. They have to go find that cold hole in the ground, and that's where they spend the winter. All of these bats have live babies called pups. And most bats, because they're long-lived, they only have one baby each year, but our very smallest bat, our tricolored bat, which is the fourth bat from the left in that first row, they can have triplets, and they carry those little triplets with them when they're first born. Bats are our most effective predator of night-flying insects. They eat almost their entire body weight in bugs every single night, and so we should be really grateful that they're out there doing that service for us. And although we don't have any pollinating bats here in Oklahoma, globally, bats are really important pollinators. They pollinate species like figs and cacao and agave. So if you like tequila, you could thank a bat because they are needed to pollinate the agave plant where that comes from. We can go to the next slide, Katie. So unfortunately, bats face a number of threats as well. Historically, bats face direct mortality from humans. They have been much maligned in a number of cultures and very misunderstood for many, many years. So the biggest threat they used to face was just people going in and killing them in their colonies. But even 25 years ago, the most prominent threats to bats was from habitat loss, from development. But that's changed a lot in recent decades. In truth, bats are faced with unprecedented challenges now. Wind energy development can have a significant impact on our migratory bats. You can see that poor little hoary bat didn't make it through the puzzle out there of the landscape. And even more recently, white nose syndrome, which some of you have probably heard about. It's a disease caused by a non-native fungus. It's not from the US. It was accidentally introduced from somewhere in Europe or Asia. It's decimating our hibernating bat populations. So you couple this with the bad rap that bats sometimes get for the potential role that they play in these zoonotic events, the bats really need our help. Go to the next slide, Katie. So the Nature Conservancy of Oklahoma has been working to protect critical habitat for bats and many other creatures since 1978. Our Ozark cave preserves are very special places where only a few researchers and managers are allowed to visit every year. These are not open to the public, and we regulate access to them very carefully because these are very delicate and sensitive sites. These sites protect not only species like the endangered gray bat or the endangered Ozark big-eared bat, but other interesting cave obligate species that are also endangered, such as the Ozark cavefish, the Delaware County cave crayfish, and the Oklahoma crayfish. As you can guess by those names, those species have very, very limited distributions, and some are found in only a few caves within a county. So these caves form in the limestone karst geology that underlays our Ozark Mountains. And when protected, that karst geology can provide pure, clear, cold water streams underground. And that's the very habitat that these cave fish and these cave crayfish need. Currently, right now, we have 4 critical caves protected in Northeast Oklahoma. Will you go to the next slide, Katie? So we do not do this alone. We work very closely with partners, including the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation, the Grand River Dam Authority, private landowners, researchers, and many more to better understand the needs of these different species as well as to protect their homes. We've been assisting the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who's been monitoring the impacts of white nose syndrome on threatened and endangered bats at the Ozark Plateau National Wildlife Refuge for years. In addition, we've been working with partners to install bat-friendly gates at our cave entrances, which you can see here on the right-hand side of your screen. So these cave gates, they allow bats to safely fly in and out, but they preclude people from entering and disturbing these endangered bats at sensitive times of the year. This is often dark work, dirty work, dank work, but it's also a lot of fun, and you get to work with a lot of really great people. I consider myself very lucky to work with our partners here in this region on this stuff. Will you go to the next slide, Katie? So we also work with partners in Western Oklahoma. Our caves and our bats are very different. We work with private landowners to evaluate existing cave sites for roost suitability. And this picture that you're looking at here is a cave in Major County, Oklahoma. And this cave used to be home to thousands of Brazilian free-tailed bats. Those are those big, high-flying, migratory bats that I mentioned earlier. And they like to use these gypsum caves that we have out in Western Oklahoma. Now these bats, they are high, fast flyers. In fact, Brazilian free-tailed bats are now known as the fastest mammal on the planet. They have been clocked at moving 100 miles an hour in a dive. And if you have ever seen these guys come diving into a roost site, they sound like B-52 bombers dropping out of the sky. They move fast. But consequently, they are not terribly agile, and they need a big open area as what we call a swoop zone so they can get in and out of these caves. But because of encroachment from species like hackberry and elm, the bats have abandoned this roost. So we worked with the landowner to remove the vegetation from this entrance. We worked with partners out at USAO to go inside and evaluate and make sure that it was still appropriate habitat for bats. And then we had staff, including Chris Heiss, who is our manager of our Four Canyon Preserve, and Melissa Shackford, our director of protection, go out and chainsaw this vegetation right out of the way. So now we are going to help monitor this site for the hopeful return of this colony. Katie, can you go to the next slide? I think that is about all that I have prepared for us to talk about Oklahoma's bats. And I hope you guys have enjoyed learning a little bit about the diversity of species that we have, the diversity of habitats that they use, as well as the interesting and challenging threats that they face right now, and the really cool work that we're doing here in Oklahoma to protect them and their habitat. And so if anybody has any questions, Katie, you can certainly throw them my way.
Fantastic. Very interesting, Katie. Thank you for sharing that with us. There were some pictures of bats on that second slide you had that I thought for certain they needed a little kiss and a hug, and they were so cute and fuzzy. They looked like little toy gerbils or hamsters or something. They were adorable. Okay, so we do have questions rolling in here. So we've got a question from Jennifer, and her question is, whenever you install a bat box in your yard, which species typically inhibit those?
So what you normally get in your bat boxes in your backyard, Jennifer, are 2 species of bats with very uninspiring names. The little brown bat or the big brown bat? Now, obviously bat biologists are not known for their creative name giving here, but those are two very different species that are very cosmopolitan and very common in our urban areas. Our little brown bats and our big brown bats are the types of bats that you would see living in attics or in abandoned homes or buildings or anything like that. So they're very comfortable around humans. And so they're the ones that normally go in, and you only ever really find them in the summer. So our bat boxes are installed in the hopes of providing what's called maternity habitat for our bats. And so what you would get if it was colonized is a group of pregnant females, and that's where they go to give birth to their little baby pups and raise them and then move on through the course of the summer.
How cool. Awesome. Great question, Jennifer. Thank you. So we have a lot of questions here, folks. So I'm going to kind of, we've got several about white nose syndrome, one from Rebecca, and I'm going to ask them both to you right quick, Katie, because I think you can answer them both together. One from Rebecca asking, are all the bat species affected by white nose? And then are there studies, this is from Jennifer, are there studies going on in the state for white nose syndrome?
Good question. So not all species of bats are impacted by white nose syndrome. The only species of bats that are impacted are hibernating bats. So the fungus that causes white nose syndrome is it's called sacrophilic. So it's cold loving. It needs a cold, wet environment to exist, which ironically is exactly what our hibernating bats are looking for. So a number of our hibernating bats are seriously impacted by white nose syndrome, where we are seeing colony losses of up to 97% fatality, and that is extinction level. It's very serious, but not every hibernating bat is impacted by white nose syndrome. So there are a number of studies and that have been going on for really the past 10 years since white nose has been on the scene here in North America, trying to figure out why that is, and more importantly, figuring out if there's anything that we can do to stop it. There are a couple of studies going on here in Oklahoma. We do have white nose syndrome in Oklahoma. It has been here for years, and we are seeing serious impacts to our hibernating bats, particularly in eastern Oklahoma. There's a couple of research studies going on with OU and the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation, tracking the impact of bats over time and ideally monitoring their activity level. At this point, there is unfortunately no way to stop white nose syndrome. And so we are, I think, unable to find an intervention at this point. And really the best that most researchers are hoping for is ways to slow the decline and to boost the response after white nose goes through a colony so that bats can recover.
So Katie, a follow-up to that from Melissa is, are we seeing an increase in white nose syndrome in Oklahoma? Or as you said, what you just said in regards to resolving it, but are we seeing an increase? Do we know?
It is continuing to spread. More colonies are showing up positive, and we have not seen any recovery from sites that have been impacted yet.
Thank you for clarifying. Appreciate that. All right, here, let's see. What is the best advice? This is from Rose. What is the best advice to give others when they find live bats on the ground? Oh, this is a good one, Rose.
Yeah, this is a good one. So as with any wildlife, if you are not trained, I encourage you not to touch it. You know, just any type of wildlife can bite you. Any type of wildlife can carry disease. And so what you want to do is protect yourself, right? And so if possible, I would let it alone and see if it just moves on its merry way. A lot of species do. They maybe are just stunned or dehydrated and need a minute to recover, and then they'll move along. But if not, a good thing to do is to get some good heavy leather gloves and a shoebox and, you know, like a piece of cardboard, and use those to move the bat into the shoebox to kind of scoop it up, you know, like sweep it in so that you don't touch it, and then put a lid on it. And then I would call the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation and ask them to come and pick it up and ask them what they want to do with it. So I encourage you not to touch wildlife and to call the experts to help with it.
Fantastic. Good answer. Thank you, Katie G. Nick is asking, and by the way, I can vouch for Nick. He is an incredible volunteer. He's helped us a lot out at the Blue River. So Nick, great to see you on here, buddy. Thanks for joining us. He's asking if there are volunteer opportunities to work with bats in Oklahoma.
That is a really good question. I do know that the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation has sort of a long-term monitoring study where they are using acoustic detectors to monitor bat activity across the landscape. But I don't know if they have any opportunities to volunteer with that. I do also know that the Ozark Plateau National Wildlife Refuge has some ongoing monitoring work that they do, and they may have some opportunities to volunteer there. But I would have to reach out to them. I don't know off the top of my head.
Good deal. And Nick, just send us an email. I can connect you with KDG and or vice versa, but ping me and I'll put you two in touch, okay? You'll really enjoy it. I hope you get to meet Nick in person, Katie. He's an incredible person. All right, we have another one here. Christopher Hill is asking, oh, this is exciting. So first of all, KDG, Christopher Hill, his father lives in Major County, and so he is curious if bats have returned to that cave. He knows that his dad would be very interested in this.
Oh, well, I don't know yet. So this work was just done like last month, you guys. Yeah. So we had monitored it. This had been on our radar for a couple of years. People were interested in seeing if we could do an internal survey. There was a rumor that when we were having the earthquakes that perhaps the inside of that cave had collapsed and was no longer even suitable for the bats to return to. So we had to go do an internal survey. Turns out it's fine in there. Then we had to go back and work with the landowner to get the vegetation removed. And that was just done like in the middle of March for all of COVID-19. So we haven't been able to go back out there in the past 6 weeks to see if there's any activity. But if they do return, this is the time of year that they would be returning. So I don't have an answer to that yet, Chris, but I'm really hopeful they come back.
Oh, I hope so too. I just got goosebumps thinking about that, Katie. You know, like you all going out and checking on it and monitoring the site and seeing bats there. That would be very exciting. So Chris, we'll keep you updated on that for sure. Looks like we've got another one here from Nancy. She's curious as to what is the most endangered bat and what is being done to help.
Ooh, so the most endangered bat in the world or in the U.S. or in Oklahoma?
Nancy, you want to clarify that for us? Let's wait and let's see if she can type in and let us know geographically where she might be referencing. Sounds like that's a big question.
Yeah, it's different levels of endangerment for sure.
You bet. She said in the U.S.
Ah, okay. So this one I got, Nancy. The most endangered bat in the U.S. is the Florida bonneted bat, and I did work with this bat for several years, and I have to tell you, I love this bat. They're sort of gentle giants. They live just in the very southern tip of Florida at Big Cypress National Recreation Area and the Everglades National Park and certain parts of the city of Miami, interestingly enough, but they're very limited habitat distribution because they rely on some of these big old trees that have been lost over the years because of increased hurricane activity down there. And so the habitat, the roosts that they require are almost gone from the landscape. And so what is being done with that species is trying to better understand their needs and their distribution on the landscape, and then establish new roosting sites for them through special bat boxes in habitat that we think that they would actually inhabit. And so they're a great team of people down there. I loved working with them, and I actually miss working with them quite a bit, and they care an awful lot about that species. So there's an awful lot of work being done on the Florida bonnet bat. And I encourage you to Google them because they are really cute bats.
Oh, awesome. Nancy, we're going to have to get to know the Florida bonnet. Is that?
Bonneted.
Bonneted. Okay. Cute. Can't wait to see them. These are really cute creatures. This has been a lot of fun. We've got a couple more questions here for you, Katie. Rebecca has a couple follow-up questions here. Speak to your white nose conversation we had earlier. She's curious so in regards to white nose syndrome, do any bats survive starting some, as the current popular term, herd immunity? Excuse me, y'all.
Herd immunity, yeah. Oh, that's actually a really complicated question. So yes, some bats do get infected with the fungus and don't develop the disease. And then other bats get infected with the fungus, develop the disease, and survive. Why some survive, we're not exactly sure. We think it has something to do with how long they may hibernate, as well as body size and certainly body condition. So bigger, fatter, healthier bats that go into hibernation are more likely to survive than smaller, skinnier, less healthy bats that go into hibernation, because the way white nose essentially kills bats is it's very irritating. It's a fungus that gets in their nose and their ears and on their little wings, and it kind of dries them out and dehydrates them and wakes them up a lot through the course of the winter. And that's a real problem if you are a hibernating bat, because you only have so much fat to get through the winter period. And every time they wake up, they burn a little bit of fat that they need. And so if they wake up repeatedly through the course of the winter, because this fungus is invading their skin and disrupting them, they're going to burn up all their fat reserves, and they're going to wake up in January or in February, and there's not going to be a bug on the landscape for them to go and eat and replenish their reserves. So they are dying from, that's the process that's killing them, but it's not the type of disease where you get like an antibody that then you can develop herd immunity to, like what we're seeing right now with COVID-19. It's not caused by a virus where we get an immune response that would then protect us from exposure again. It's a very different kind of disease.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that with us, Katie. That's really interesting about the fat that they burn throughout the winter, so while they're hibernating. All right, so Rebecca does have another question here, and I believe you may have answered part of this earlier, and I'm going to use this as a test quiz for me to see if I was listening. She says, how many different species of bats are in the USA? And I think you said 47, or in the US, 41.
46.
46. Oh, so one number off. All right. That was fun. That was like a game show right there. Okay. So this second half of her question is, and is there any evidence of hybridization between any species?
I don't know. Well, I mean, there is evidence of hybridization from species of bats on the landscape. But here in the US, I cannot name two species that we know to hybridize. There's a little bit of lumping and splitting. This is a little bit of biology talk and taxonomy here. So when I say there's between 1,300 and 1,400 different species of bats, it's not because we don't know, it's because we are in disagreement on that number, right? So some people think that, well, based on, these body traits or this genetic signature, these are different species. And other people think, well, that actually makes them the same species, or that doesn't make them different enough to call them two different species. So there's a little bit of difference there. And this actually does apply to your question, because when we look at genetics and physical traits like that, sometimes it is hard to decide whether they are different species or the same species. And I'll use the Florida bonneted bat as an example. For a long time, people thought the Florida bonneted bat was another species that's common throughout the Caribbean. But based on some information that we got from genetics, we were able to see that they are actually a unique species and isolated. And so there is some evidence that maybe that species has moved across the Caribbean landscape. And in that case, maybe there was some hybridization with this other species. That's the closest one that I've got for an answer for you on that. But I don't know of any that we see regularly hybridizing with an active hybridization zone. We are still trying to tease out a lot of information about taxonomy and distribution and uniqueness right now.
Fantastic. Okay, so Katie, there's not any other questions from our incredible attendees, but I do have one for you. How do you know all this information about bats?
Yes. So I mentioned at the top of the hour that I have been working with bats for about 20 years, which is not something that I ever thought I would end up doing. But, when I was an undergrad, I did an undergraduate research project at the University of Idaho, is where I went to school, and I looked at bat activity, and that led to another job where I got to go and study bats doing acoustic surveys. And that led to another job where I was trapping bats in Yellowstone National Park. And then that led to a graduate project. It just snowballed. And before I knew it, I was a bat expert. And now I've got more bat information in my brain, in my tiny bat brain, than anybody ever expected to have. But, you know, through all of that, I've really fallen in love with these creatures. They are challenging to work with. They are interesting. They are diverse. And they are certainly underappreciated. But I do hope that everybody has a new appreciation for them based on our talk today.
Absolutely. I know I do. And really appreciate you sharing all this with us. It's been very educational and entertaining for sure. And appreciate everyone joining us. Right quick, we do want to let you know, though, if you, excuse me, let me pull this up right quick. Whoops. Here we go. If you do want to, or excuse me, we do have recordings of these webinars posted on our YouTube channel. So that address is youtube.com/natureok. So you can view past webinar recordings as well as if you want to rewatch one that you did get to attend, we do post those there. So it usually takes us about 24 hours to get those posted. So give us just a little bit of time, but we'll get this one posted on our YouTube channel as well here pretty quickly. We also have Facebook Live videos. If you want to keep on engaging with us, we've got all kinds of things going on. This week, we've got Katie Blunk from Western Oklahoma at the Lazy KT Ranch out in Freedom, Oklahoma. She has taken over our Facebook page. She is a hoot and a lot of fun. So tune in. She'll be doing a live video tomorrow at 10 a.m. and you'll get to get a behind the scenes experience of what it's like to live out on the ranch and what all goes on there. So she's talking a lot about prescribed burns and cattle grazing and pollinators this week. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So join us there. And then of course we're on Twitter, twitter.com/nature_ok. And then also if you're looking for more ways to engage at home or with the kiddos or bringing nature indoors, we do have some tips and tricks and some different programs available such as virtual field trips. And you can get a glimpse of those on our website at nature.org/Oklahoma. The links are there and I'll take you straight to them. Our next webinar series on the webinar for the Nature Connects Us series is with Brad Carl. He is our external affairs and climate specialist. He's also a meteorologist and you may recognize his face. He was once a reporter meteorologist from Fox 23. And so he's joined us just this last December, and he will be doing a webinar on flooding and fires and the impacts of extreme weather. So this will be a really entertaining one. Hope that you can join us. And we will look forward to seeing you then. That's going to be next Wednesday, May 6th from 12 to 1 p.m. We'll learn more about what is causing that extreme weather, those extreme weather patterns, and how we can mitigate them with Brad Carl. So many thanks for everyone for tuning in today. Big special thank you to Katie Gillies for sharing all of her bat love and her bat knowledge with us. We had a great time. So thank you, Katie. And we'll see you all next week on our next webinar next Wednesday at noon. All right. Thank you all.